Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my BookTube channel. This is the beginning of my January 2024 reading vlog, which is... the year is but a scant week old and already it has been such a week. I'm never of the opinion that January is the time to make your big plans and start a whole new life and everything, but I do make a little plans and schemes list, usually of fun things that I want to do or things that I'm looking forward to in the rest of the year. So by the time you see this, you'll actually have already probably watched that, but just in case you haven't, go watch my plans and schemes for 2024 video. It's going to be a lot of fun. But right now I just wanted to check in about the books that I am starting to read in the new year so far. Started things off with a bang this year reading All's Well by Mona Awad. This was my first book by her, and I had heard really great things about her, but didn't really know what to expect going in, other than that her stuff gets kind of weird and dark, and oh boy did this. This follows the adventures or misadventures of Miranda, who is this college theater professor in her 40s. By the way, just shout out to having a book where the main character is not literally a kid, just because as I'm getting older, I like that there are books that have teenagers and young people as protagonists, but please, more older protagonists. Our lives don't just magically stop once we pass the age of 25. So yeah, she has this chronic pain from an injury that she sustained falling off a stage. She used to be this theater star, and now she's kind of washed up, is the kind way to put it. Her students really want to stage Macbeth, but she insists that they need to do All's Well That Ends Well, and you find out that this is mostly because she has a lot of personal history associated with that play, and in some ways it's kind of her weird attempt to relive her glory days by having her favorite student play the lead role, which is, of course, the role that she herself played. Students aren't happy about this. She's not happy with the students. Then she winds up meeting these three strange men in a bar. They pretty much offer her some type of bargain or a trick or a would you like to have a good time type deal, and she doesn't really think anything of it until suddenly strange things start happening around the theater. I really, really loved what this book does. It is so clever in many ways. It is very subtle. It does a great job of adapting multiple Shakespeare plays. I won't give away too much because that's one of the delights of reading this book, and I thought it was a really fascinating look at the concept of the problem play, but through prose and in a novel. I did give this book 5 stars, even though it isn't totally perfect. By the end, I think there are some plot holes that are never quite really resolved, I think, to satisfaction. But honestly, the book hung together so well that I had to give it 5 stars. I was just blown away by it. And coincidentally, it has one of the greatest opening chapters of a novel that I have read in quite a long time. The opening chapter was just, wow, absolutely incredible Rainbow Road of Marrow deals of prose. It was so awesome. So I really loved reading that. And then I had a just okay audiobook experience. I read The Bell in the Fog, which is the second Andy Mills gay detective book by Lev Rosen. And this was pretty much a direct sequel, picks up where the first book left off. So now in Andy, who used to be a cop, but then got busted when the police found out about his identity. This takes place in San Francisco in the 1950s, by the way. So it is a detective story, and it's modern, but it's not contemporary, is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, after he gets kicked off the force, this second book begins with him working as a private detective for the queer community in San Francisco, which is kind of where he left at the end of the first book. And this one is that classic, we bring up the dramatic connections and backstory and poke on the threads from the detective's past in order to try and break them by having them be too close to the case or whatever. So he is meant to be solving a case of a blackmailing scheme that's gone wrong. There are 2 siblings who have been blackmailing people, and the brother has gone missing. So he gets hired to figure out what's going on with this, and it winds up connecting a lot to his time in the Navy during the Second World War, the friendships and relationships that he had there, and it's just this whole big thing. What I really thought I thought that the second book would be better than the first in the series, and to be clear, I enjoyed the first one. It was good, but usually the writing improves a little bit as the author like goes on with their stories, and I just didn't find that to be the case here. One of the things that I disliked about this book is that when I read a mystery, I do like to be able to try and figure it out along with the protagonist. And then when key pieces of information are withheld until the very end, I kind of feel cheated a little bit out of the mysteryness of it all. Maybe I'm reading this the wrong way, because I realized that the other thing that I don't really care for about this series is that it's very heavily detective noir. And I've learned this past year that that is just not my thing. I like detective noir tropes, so in a tabletop RPG, I love some good detective noir tropes. I like to watch the classic noir movies. I don't like reading it. So maybe that's part of where my disappointment in the mystery of it comes from, because it's definitely a lot more focused on the noir aspects of the character and of his development. And oh my goodness, he is such an irritatingly self-pitying gay guy in this. Like, some of it I know was exacerbated by the audiobook performance, which got to the point where it did begin to sound kind of histrionic at times, which was a bit ridiculous for me. But oh my goodness, could we please get past the point where this character is just spouting all of this shame and self-loathing and all of this? It just became very tiresome to read in such a way that I really did not enjoy like the middle third of the book, because it's a lot of him dealing with that. And I'm like, then have it be in the name of character development and have him progress through it. I couldn't deal with this guy being like, woe is me, I am gay. Not just like, wow, it sucks that this terrible thing happened to me because I'm gay, but like, I'm not going to make it my whole personality. I know that sounds harsh, but it just did not work for me. So I wound up giving the book 3 out of 5 stars because it was fine, but I honestly don't think that the second book will entice me to continue with this series unless I wind up hearing that like the third book is amazing. But yeah, it was fine. I guess like it's good if you like to read detective noir, and I just don't. And then the third book that I have finished so far this year is Absolute Wonder Woman Volume 1. This is one of the gigantic DC Absolute hardcover editions that comes with the fancy ribbon bookmark and the slipcase. And my husband got it for me for Christmas this year. I was so delighted to receive it. The artwork is done by Cliff Chang, who is one of my favorite artists. He did all of the artwork for Paper Girls and has just illustrated a lot of other comics I've really enjoyed. I enjoyed the total like reboot of Wonder Woman canon because this is part of DC's New 52 that they did back in the early 2000s, where they rebooted all of their storylines, threw out all the old stuff, and just began anew. And I really like this comic's take on the Greek gods. It's very easy, I think, when you get into, especially where we are right now, where we have so many Greco-Roman retellings, for the style and the aesthetic and the sensibility of each god or each other character from the mythology to start to be very similar. Like every Zeus is similar to every other Zeus, down to the way that they look, the way that they pose, the body type they have. And what I enjoyed about this comic series is that that was not the case. They were still recognizably those gods and goddesses, but in a new and interesting way. It reminded me of some of my favorite parts of the character designs for The Wicked and the Divine, and also Sandman, interestingly enough. I see a lot of Sandman influences in the character design and some of the writing for this. So I finished that first half of Absolute Wonder Woman. I have the second book as well, which Sean gave to me as kind of an early birthday gift. My birthday is next month, and I will be turning 30. More about that later. But that was fantastic. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which for comics is a very high rating from me. It's very difficult for me to like rate comics 5 stars, but when I do. And then I'm currently reading The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which I received as a birthday gift last year from my sister-in-law. And I figured that I should probably read this before my birthday comes back around. Oopsie. This is a very sweet, almost a like light level of fantasy or fabulous story about a man named Linus Baker, who is this magical orphanage inspector. And he has to go to this orphanage where there are a bunch of children who are considered magical youth. There are a lot of, I think, definite analogs to other ways in history in which children have become racialized, right? So like these children have to be registered with the government. They have caseworkers assigned to them. They are trying to get the children to suppress their magical abilities, to place them out in families for adoption or fostering with non-magical things. So it's very much akin to this kind of like cultural erasure that we have seen in our actual like history, which does bring me to the fact that I know that TJ Klune, the author, has been criticized for writing, saying that he was explicitly inspired by the 60s scoop, which was something that happened in the 1960s in the United States specifically, where US government agents removed indigenous children from their families and put them into residential schools or put them to be fostered with white families so that they would lose their culture, lose their language, not be allowed to be raised in community. And I know that TJ Klune has been criticized in some ways for his dealing with that, but kind of decontextualizing those events in this fictional way. Again, I haven't finished the book yet, but when I started reading it, I was like, oh, this actually reminds me a lot about like the history of things like residential schools that I have read about. So I encourage you to check out some of the reviews that are by Indigenous readers who are reading this. This is not something that is part of TJ Klune's experience, but I think checking out what Indigenous reviewers have to say, and I will also share some books that are similarly for like this similar type of audience that deal with things like residential schools and cultural genocide of Indigenous people in the Americas. That's not, my family experience or anything like that, but I figure I can go ahead and share some of those resources as well. That all being said, I am really enjoying the book. I am enjoying how normalized queerness is in this book. We have a man who's 40 years old who is just a regular guy and falling for another man. Again, love having a main character of a book that is not a child or early 20s, late teens kind of age. It's got such a sweet and like light sense of humor to it. You have the sense that these characters really do care for each other and that they are all like brought together by their shared experience of being outcast and not being accepted by the society that they live in. Truly. I mean, they are literally isolated in this orphanage on an island that none of the other people want to visit because they don't like the magical youth, and they are literally sending them messages being like, go back to where you came from and things of that nature. One of the other things I've really enjoyed about this book so far is that it fills a particular niche, which is a book that I think could be enjoyed by a pretty wide age range of people. I would say this would be good for maybe 12 and up, to be honest. It's not really a kiddie book per se, and I think it really also depends on your 12-year-old. It is also a 400-page book. So there's that. But yeah, I think that this is one of those rare books that can definitely be appreciated by all ages and read at all ages. And you probably get something different each time you read through it. So those are my preliminary thoughts on The House in the Cerulean Sea, and I will be checking back in with you later with some more reading updates. Hello. Angle's going to be a little bit weird because I'm up on my kitchen counter, but I have a little impromptu book haul for you. So a while ago, currently we're doing a week-long general strike in support of the people that are in Palestine, who are the victims of the genocide happening there. So part of my participation in the strike is that I am not spending money on anything that is not food or medication this week. So when I tell you this, it's because I had pre-ordered these books like way back at the beginning of the year, end of last year. So I did not purchase these during the strike week, but I did purchase them previously, so I wanted to share them with you. So the first one I got from bookshop.org. It's been back-ordered everywhere, and it is Eyeliner, A Cultural History by Zara Hankir. This looks really interesting. I'm going to go ahead and read you the back. So, from the distant past to the present, with fingers and felt-tip pens, metallic powders and gel pots, humans have been drawn to lining their eyes. The aesthetic trademark of figures ranging from Nefertiti to Amy Winehouse, eyeliner is one of our most enduring cosmetic tools. Ancient royals and Gen Z beauty influencers alike would attest to its uniquely transformative power. It is undeniably fun, yet it is also far from frivolous. Seen through Zara Hunkir's kohl-lined eyes, this ubiquitous but seldom examined product becomes a portal to history, proof of both of the stunning variety among cultures across time and space and of our shared humanity. Through intimate reporting and conversations with nomads in Chad, geishas in Japan, dancers in India, drag queens in New York, and more, eyeliner embraces the rich history and significance of its namesake, especially among communities of color. What emerges is an unexpectedly moving portrait of a tool that in various corners of the globe can signal religious devotion, attract potential partners, ward off evil forces, shield eyes from the sun, transform faces into fantasy, and communicate volumes without saying a word. Can't wait to read this. I have often said that if I had to give up in all makeup products but one, I'd keep eyeliner. Sometimes I switch and think I would keep lipstick, but it would probably be eyeliner. And the second book I actually pre-ordered from a new bookstore to me. They are called Loyalty Books. Here's their little logo. And they are a queer, Black, and Asian owned business in the DC, Maryland area. So I was served a targeted ad, and let me tell you, it targeted me for, look at this, Escaping Mr. Rochester, signed by the author, L.L. McKinney. Oh, look at that. Oh, okay, hold on a second. So the author signed it, very nice of them. But then they also put in little bookmarks for me. That's so sweet. So it's a link to their Libro FM and then also just bookmarks. So Escaping Mr. Rochester. Let me read you the blurb for this. Jane Eyre has no interest in a husband. Eager to make her own way in the world, she accepts the governess position at Thornfield Hall. Though her new employer, Edward Rochester, has a charming air, not to mention a handsome face, he doesn't really in the original, just saying. Jane discovers that his smile can sharpen in an instant. Plagued by Edward's mercurial mood and the strange wails that echo through the corridors, Jane grows suspicious of the secrets hidden within Thornfield Hall, unaware of the true horrors lurking above her very head. On the topmost floor, Bertha Mason is trapped in more ways than one. After her whirlwind marriage to Edward turned into a nightmare, he locked her away as revenge for withholding her inheritance. Now his patience grows thin in the face of Bertha's resilience and Jane's persistent questions, and both young women are in more danger than they realize. When their only chance at safety, and perhaps something more, is in each other's arms, can they find and keep one another safe before Edward's dark machinations close around on them? So Jane and Bertha solving, I was going to say solving crimes. They're not solving crimes. They're busting out of Thornfield and maybe falling in love. I haven't read a new YA book in forever, it feels like. I used to read a lot of YA and I just kind of dropped off it. But Jane Eyre has been one of my favorite books, yes, despite its flaws and issues, for a very long time. So getting the chance to have a new take on it, always super exciting. And it was also blurbed by Bethany C. Marrow, who was the author of A Song Below Water, which was the Black Mermaids book that came out some years ago now. I think I had that discussed in a booktube video way back when. So yay, new books for me. Happy weekend. Hey everybody, it is January 26th. The month is almost finished. Kind of wild. I have not done a reading update in a minute, but I have been busy reading. So I have 4 books here to go through with you and just kind of share my initial thoughts. So 2 of them were the ones that I shared in my I have to read these books by a certain time or else. And one of them was Bug Boys, which is a graphic novel by Laura Netzger. It's funny, the graphic novels wound up being actually quite backlisted. This came out in 2011, and it's just a cute story of 2 little bugs that are friends and go on very, child-centric adventures. I think that this is a good comic for a young person in your life if they're interested in bugs, if they like insects, if they like stories about friendship. For me, it was a little more kid-like. I had hoped there was going to be a little bit more oomph to it, but it was still really good. I think I'm actually going to pass this on to a young person in my life. The next one was The Plain Janes by Cecil Castellucci and Jim Rugg, and oh my gosh, this was so wonderful. So this is actually an omnibus of 3 different graphic novels that were collected into this one single volume back in 2020, and it follows the adventures of the Janes. They're these 4 girls that are all named Jane, and they decide that they want to kind of break out of just this stale suburban existence that they kind of have. So they form this art collective called People Loving Art in Neighborhoods. So it's Plain Janes. And they go around and they're doing like street art and different installations around the town and kind of attracting both the admiration of people that are very appreciative of what they're doing, but also the ire of the local police officer, who is just a real turd in this book, if I'm being perfectly honest. And this really does grapple with a lot of important questions, like why do we make art? What is the balance between having your art be socially accepted into circles of like the city government and art critics and fellowships versus continuing to push the envelope with your expression, using art to speak truth to power? And so when those goals collide, what kind of conflict ensues and what do you do about it? I loved The Plain Janes. It was fantastic. Definitely going to be holding on to that book, probably sharing it out with some people if I'm honest. And then I had 2 Indigenous reads. One of them was Hunting by Stars by Cherie Dimaline. I did give myself a bit of a mulligan because I said that I had to read this by the end of 2023, which I didn't, but I have read it now. So I feel like I can say I completed that challenge that I set for myself. And this is a young adult novel, kind of sci-fi speculative, that is a sequel to her book, The Marrow, Thieves. And I have to say, I kind of liked The Marrow, Thieves more. This felt like a sequel that she even admits in the back of the book. The reason why she wrote it was because of fans and people that loved the original book clamoring and asking for her to write more stories of the people that we get to know, like French and Rose and all of the other kids that are trying to evade the government. The government in this point is kidnapping people who are indigenous and then killing them to harvest their bone marrow. There's a whole thing going on where like they need the bone marrow because people have stopped dreaming and they get this plague that stops them from dreaming and it eventually kills them. And because of things like racism, they decide, oh, we just need to kill indigenous people for their bone marrow. And this does an examination of the kind of brainwashing that happens in the residential schools and other things that the government or the church specifically takes place in Canada. So a lot of their residential schools there were actually administered by the Catholic Church. So yeah, it is more of a discussion of what residential schools are like in Canada. But I just felt while I was reading it that this was like a lot of nice extra, but I didn't really think that it needed to happen, I guess. I don't feel like this book really added anything to the story and the saga of these characters, and I just didn't find it as impactful as the first. Maybe it's because I really liked that being a standalone. I don't know. I'm still having a little bit of trouble articulating my feelings about that just because it seems kind of mean to be like, why was this book written? But you can kind of tell, you know, this was not a story that was like burning to be told necessarily. Anyways, I then read an ARC that I got, A Thunder Song, which is an essay collection by Sasha Dokshablu Lapointe, who is an Indigenous woman who is actually from Washington, near-ish to where I live. I read her memoir, Red Paint, last year, which is about her growing up as a young Indigenous person during the era of Riot Girl, her experiences navigating that identity in a white supremacist world. And this is kind of more in the same vein. It's less about her personal stories, and it's more essays about thoughts and meditations on Indigenous life, practices like her tribe's ceremony that they do when they catch the first salmon of the year, and they have like a parade and a festival for it, and they put it on like a throne of planks and decorate it with cedar boughs. And so this was a really good essay collection. I enjoyed it a lot. It says that it's coming out on March 2024. I was kindly given this ARC by a friend who works at a bookstore, and Sasha was kind enough to sign it. So thank you much for that. And then we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Oh my, I think maybe I mentioned this closer to the beginning of this reading vlog, but this was a book that I had really high hopes for that actually really wound up disappointing me, and I was not happy about that. So you've probably at least heard of the title. It was one of those wildly popular book talk books last year. And I know that TJ Klune is still a very popular writer, but this is about a guy named Linus Baker who is an orphanage inspector, and he is tasked to go inspect this orphanage that is full of magical children that have been deemed dangerous to society, so that's why they're off in this orphanage being sequestered away from everyone else. And then their sort of orphan master, the guy that's taking care of them, is also a magical human himself. Where I had a problem with this book was in the clunkiness and ultimately very like wishy-washy stance it took on the statement it was trying to make. So TJ Klune has said that he was inspired by stories of the 60s scoop, stories of residential schools and the people who experienced them, that was going to be similar to the things that these like magical children who are orphans experience. By having their protagonist kind of be the good government employee, you know, the one that isn't just seeing these children as statistics or numbers or something like that, you're supposed to have this idea that, like, because of Linus's empathy, he's going to be able to, like, resist this system that is classifying these children as dangerous, and in some cases, like, people just really wanting to, like, kill the kids because they're like, okay, this kid can turn into a weird, like, blobfish. We don't like it. We don't want it. But what this all boiled down to is just, well, people are only mean to these children and treating these children poorly because they are afraid of them and their powers. And if the world was just a kinder place and we all did these like small acts of kindness, that would solve all of these problems. Which in theory is a nice sentimental thought, but in practice, it's like individual acts of kindness by themselves are not going to dismantle an oppressive structure. At best, they're going to provide like small moments of humanity and connection for people that are existing under this oppression, but it isn't actually challenging the real problem, which is the fact that the kids are, you know, sequestered away and kept kind of in a jail, you know, in that case, it is very similar to the residential schools. But at the same time, like, that comparison is very clunky and kind of disrespectful in my opinion, because the other thing is that in the book, there's this idea that the only reason that the villagers like don't like the children is because they fear them. But being afraid of a child is not ever an excuse to abuse or bully a child, which is what the adults do in this book. And I'm just like, I don't care what your personal feelings are towards that. That is a big, like, no line, do not cross. It turns into victim blaming to just say, well, we have to be understanding and compassionate because these adults are just afraid of the children and that's why they treat them badly. And that really rubbed me the wrong way too, because in the residential schools, from, you know, my reading and learning and what I understand, the goal was to eradicate Indigenous culture and make them all assimilate into white culture and like white supremacist culture. And the governments and the churches that sponsored that kind of thing didn't do that because they were afraid of Indigenous people. They did that because they were white supremacists. And they wanted to prove that they had this power and control over people that they saw as bestial and savage and uncivilized. So to have that comparison there always, and to know that in many places this kind of scooping of Indigenous children out of their families and cultures is still going on to this day. I will leave a link to a video that, what is her name, Reads with Rachel did about this actually, so you can see all of the different sources there. But with all of this still going on, to then have TJ Klune write a book that's kind of treating it as a magical orphanage that will save the day when everyone just learns to be kind, I'm just like, no, what are you even saying? What are you even doing? it's a shame because I really wanted to like the book, and I did like a lot of things about his writing. Like, it was still a very enjoyable read. It was just that I think the politics of the book he thought were going to be more earth-shattering and meaningful than they actually are, when really it just comes across as, hey, I'm taking like a really serious and dramatic thing that happened to other people, kind of watering it down and diluting it so that I can make art, and then completely erasing the fact that this is a structure that is white supremacist oppression. And it's just like, well, if we're just all nice to each other, we can get along. And I'm just like, no. So I've kind of rambled a little bit about that. But that's what I've been reading lately. I'm currently working on another reading blog that you're going to see in a little bit. It's about books that have to do with the ocean and the sea. So I'm not going to talk about the books that I have read that are for that vlog, so you'll just have to go watch it when it gets posted. I think that's everything that I have to update, so I will see you shortly. Take it easy. Hey everyone, it is probably going to be my last entry for the January reading vlog because it is the second to last day of January. And when I filmed the last one, I actually wound up forgetting to mention a couple books that I had finished earlier this month. So the first one of those is a historical graphic novel / graphic memoir called Washington's Gay General. It's written by Josh Trujillo and illustrated by Levi Hastings, and I loved this book. This was one of my most anticipated releases of last year. I really love Josh and Levi's work, and I have been following the story of making this since the days when they made it as a really small zine that I got in my local comic book store. Levi's a local artist to me. I love meeting up with these guys at conventions and talking about our shared interest in queer history, particularly queer American history. And it's just really nice to get to read something like this that is in like my particular area of interest, but that's also pretty like widely available and approachable for most people. Like, a lot of the stuff that I have read about this, a lot of people don't know about because most of it is like within academic or university press type reading areas, and that is not always the most approachable or even like findable, I guess, for regular everyday readers that just want to know more. So Washington's Gay General was a fantastic blending of historical storytelling and memoir about a complicated and fascinating and really influential figure in American Revolutionary War history, and that is Baron von Steuben. He was a guy that was a like career soldier in Prussia who eventually came to the United States during our War of Independence and basically like modernized and got the Continental Army into actual fighting shape and was able to transform it from this poorly clothed, naked, and starving militia into a fighting force that was able to take on the full might of the British Imperial Army at the time, which, you know, was nothing short of miraculous. This guy was complicated, he was flamingly gay, he was kind of awesome, he was kind of terrible, and this is really just a fantastic read. I definitely recommend it. And then the last book that I read this month was When You Trap a Tiger by Ty Keller, and this is a middle grade book that won both the Newbery Medal and the Children's Literature Award winner from the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. This is the other book that was for kids that I picked up at Emerald City Comic Con last year, and this was so good. This was easily a 5-star read. It made me cry. It was fantastic. And it is the story of this young girl named Lily and her Halmoni, who is her grandmother in Korean. And she and her grandmother have this special bond because they share family stories and tell these stories together and everything like that. And then she winds up hearing that her grandmother has maybe made a bargain with a tiger many years ago. And the tiger has now come back to collect on that and this family secrets. It's also a story about grief and childhood loss. So there is some death that happens throughout the book. And I don't want to, not mention that because it is a pretty big part of the story. But it's also about family history and memory and the kinds of things that we cover up in telling family stories and the value that comes from talking about those things that we have selectively chosen not to talk about or chosen to actively suppress in our own family histories. I mean, I can't even say enough good about this book. It was a really amazing read. I'm keeping this for sure and recommending it to lots of people that I know, not just people who are kids, but also people who are interested in reading children's literature and who I think will appreciate the quality of the writing. So I think that's gonna do it for the January reading vlog. You know, not too bad for the first month of a new year. I think it's safe to say I enjoyed most of what I read this month, so I will take that, and I will see you all in the next one. If you like what I do here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you get updated when I post a new video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.